Hi everybody, Christian here. Today we're going to connect Xano to FlutterFlow. In doing this, I'll be using the to-do list template from the Xano marketplace with a couple modifications made to it. And I'll also be using the starter template basic auth, so login, sign up, and get me. And in the end, we'll have a project that should look something like this in FlutterFlow. So as you see, we have our login page, and if I can spell my name right, we have a login page, a sign up page, enter in our password, and we should get our authenticated data from Xano all to us, and we'll be able to add cards and delete them as well. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is our to-do APIs, and this is exactly from the template in the marketplace. I've just made a couple modifications, and we're only going to want to worry about these top three right here: post, get, and delete. And once you go into it, as we see, I have authentication, and I just have this custom query right here. To do user ID is equal to auth ID. Going to this post API, you see I have authentication turned off actually, and I have the references from my to-do table. And I also have a bit of logic in the function stack. And what this handles is if there is no image being passed, then it can still create a record. It just forgoes the image right here. And this is important because FlutterFlow actually doesn't allow us to upload files unless it goes through Firebase. But because we're going through Xano, we just will forgo the images in this tutorial. But everything else is pretty standard, just creating an image. And this would be if there was an image, but there won't be. All right, so the next one is the delete. And I don't think I made any real changes to this. Authentication might be one of them, but should be pretty standard. All right, and let's go ahead and look at our table. This is the to-do table in our database. And as you can see, I made a couple modifications to it. First one being a user reference. So I referenced the user table. I also have an image and a category and a due date, and these are both just text fields. All right, so let's head over to FlutterFlow now. Once we're in FlutterFlow, we're going to go ahead and create a project together. So I'm going to call this one Xano to do, and I'm going to create it from this blank app right here. So create new, and I clicked it, but sometimes you have to just refresh the page. It won't actually go ahead and go through. So just refreshing that, and there it is. So this is the blank app right here. So if I click on this widget tree button, I want to go ahead and click this new page. So it starts out with this just a blank home page, but I want that login and sign up to be my first one. So I'm going to go ahead and, we're going to call this login. And I'm going to grab this authenticate solo alt. So grab this one right here. And I actually do need to delete a couple things that we're not going to use. So I'm not going to worry about forget password. I'm not going to worry about this. And I don't need this row as well. And if you click on the sign up, the same thing, just delete these two rows right here. And we're actually going to want to get rid of this the blank home page as well. So delete the home page, not the one that we just created. Head to that new page as well. And we're going to go over to this list. And I'm going to grab this first one right here. So I'm going to just call this home and use the template theme. And so now we have a login, and this will be where our users are sent once they have logged in or signed up. So the first thing I want to tackle is the login API. So head over to Xano and let's go over to the API, and I'm going to hit this starter template, and I want to go to the basic auth login. So as you can see, we're going to need two inputs, email and password. If we look over here, we have email and password, so that's perfect. So I'm going to copy this endpoint URL, head over to FlutterFlow, and go to my API calls, this button right here. And I'm going to create an API call, and it is a type post. So let's make it a post, put in that. I'm going to call this Xano login. All right. Let's just add the call for now, just to have it. And it's going to need two variables, that email and that password. So email, password. And these are both going to be type string. And let's just add the call for now. And I'm going to head over to this body section and go to JSON. And if you go back to Xano, go to this documentation, we're going to actually copy and paste the schema from the Swagger UI. So right here, basic auth login. And we're just going to copy this right here, makes it a little faster. And put that in right there. And we're just going to delete this dummy data and fill it in with our variables. So email. And it says string, we want the variable password. So you can go ahead and format that. If everything looks good, save it. And we have our variables. So let's go ahead and test this out. So our email is going to be someone from our user table. So put in that email and password. And as you can see, it's a success. So we get the auth token as our response. And if you go down here to the recommended, we actually see that it actually recommends the JSON path to get that auth token. So let's go ahead and select that, come back here and give it a name. So I'm going to call this authorization, and I'm going to save right there. So the next thing to do is head over to this widget tree and we can see all of our sign in and sign up page. I want to click on the sign in button and we're going to give this, it actually starts with a little bit of, with an action on it. And we want to delete that actually. So let's open up the action tree and let's delete this one and add a new action. We're going to do this API call and we don't want these conditionals. We're not going to worry about it. So let's hit that Xano login, that API we just created. And we need to add those two variables, the email and password. So we're going to do from variable and we're going to go into the widget state and we want to pick up the email to email address and password will be password from the widget state. And we're going to rename this to actually auth token. And the next thing we want to do is we want to add another action that will take in that auth token because we're going to need that for later. But actually, we need to create that in a local state. So head over here on this local state. And this is basically going to save that auth token so that we can use it later at any time that we need. So just created that string. Go back to that action flow editor. And now we can update local state. And we want to grab that auth token. This is the local state we just created. And I want to set its value to be from this API's action output. And it's the auth token API response. And we want to just grab the JSON body and we're going to do JSON path. And there's that authorization that we made earlier. So confirm that. And now we have a working login page. One last action that we will need though is we need to actually navigate our user to the home page once they have logged in. Otherwise, they'd still be on the sign-in page. So just hit that action and navigate to home. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to go over to the sign up button. And we're actually, if you look at Xano and you look at the basic auth sign up, you can see we're going to need a name. So going to FlutterFlow, I'm just going to duplicate one of these. So I'm going to press Control D when I'm on top of this one. And I'm just going to rename it. Actually, I want to rename this top one. So double click that. There we go. Got it. Name, create. And then I'm just going to edit. Instead of saying enter your email, I'm going to say enter your name. And the label should be name. Let's go ahead and create the API. So let's create API call. And this is another post. Let's grab that endpoint URL. And I'm going to call this Xano sign up. All right, so let's go ahead and enter in those three variables. So name, email, and password. And let's go. All three are going to be type strings. And heading over to the body, we're going to set it to JSON. And let's go back to Xano. And let's open up the documentation. And I'm going to click on the sign up one. And I'm just going to copy this example schema, paste it in, and just change this dummy data for the variables. And let's make sure we add this call. That way it doesn't get deleted. We accidentally navigate off of it. All right, so this API is all finished. Let's go back over here, and I'm on the sign up tab. I'm going to hit this create account, and I want to go over here on this action. And this is, again, just the default action that it starts with. We want to delete this one. So deleting that, and we're going to add a sign up API call. So Xano sign up, that's going to be our first one. And let's put in those variables we need. So name, and that's going to be from a variable. And we're going to grab from the widget state name create. And the next variable will be email. And it's going to come from the widget email create. And password, I'm sure you guessed it, it's going to be password create from the widget state. All right. And let's go ahead and delete this conditional right here that just comes with the APIs. So the next action we're going to need is we're going to actually need to log in our user. Once they sign up, we must log them in as well. So we're going to call that Xano login. I'm going to grab those two variables, email and password. And we're actually going to want the email to be the email create and the password to be the password create as well. Widget state. Widget state password create. There we go. And let's rename this response to something we'll recognize. So let's just do auth token and we'll call it sign up. There we go. Because the next thing, just like the login, we're going to need to update the local state and grab that auth token that comes from the login API. So I'm going to update local state, and I'm going to grab that auth token. I want to set the value to be from a variable, and I want to grab it from the action output auth token signup. I'm going to grab that JSON body, JSON path, and authorization. There we go. And last but not least, we still need to navigate our user. So we'll navigate them home. So now we have sign up and sign in all working. If somebody were to sign in and sign up, they'll be navigated to this dummy data home page. Let's go ahead and actually edit some things about this. So first things first, we don't need this top row right there. And let's actually rename these tabs. This will be to do. This one will be work in progress. And this last one will be done. And we're going to leave, oh, actually we want to delete this here text as well. Oh, that was the wrong one. Let's just worry about this one for now. Make sure it's on the to-do tab and delete that categories little text right there. And so right now you can see up here, there are 4 errors, and these are all just from the dummy data that comes with this template. So if you look in this widget tree, anytime it says navigate to product list, that's one of the errors. It's just basically an example action. So we're just going to go ahead and delete each and every one of those. And you can see the error went down. And I'm going to go ahead and delete those on my own time. And I deleted all of those. I just realized we also need to delete this icon button up at the top here, because that's not going to be useful for us. And there we go. So we have no more errors after just deleting all those actions and then that very top icon right there. All right, so the next thing we're going to need to do is actually get data from Xano. So let's head over to the API and we're going to create our get method. So go to Xano, and mine happens to be in this to-do. And if you're following along with the to-do template, it should be this exact one. So grab that endpoint URL and put it in there. And I'm going to call this get user data. And in this header, you're going to need something. It'll say authorization : bearer hard brackets and then auth token. So it's, oh, I can't quite add the call because I need to go into my variable, and we need to add that auth token as a variable, and it'll be a string. And now we can add that call and save it. And so what this is doing is basically just getting authenticated data from Xano, and it needs that auth token to do it. So that's what I just handled right there. And we can go over to the response. And if I happen to run debug, in Xano, you can grab your user's auth token, copy it right there, paste it in this response, and test to see if it works. And voila, we got all of our users' data related to them. So if we look in here, we can see that the JSON paths are actually, all the recommended ones are all right here. And you can see the ID is related to the ID of the card. We have user ID, category, and there's going to be about 5 paths that we're going to need. So I'm going to start with an easy one, .id. And this is the card's ID. So I'm going to call it card ID. And the next one's going to be user underscore ID. And it'll be called user ID. And these next 3 are going to be a little more complicated. They're going to actually handle some logic. So because in my project, it's sectioned by categories, I want to grab each card that has a certain category related to it. So the first thing I want to do is make a conditional statement. And I want to say question mark, parentheses, @ dot, category is equal to work in progress. So right there, this basically says it's a conditional that says, is the category a work in progress? If it is, let's grab it. So if you preview it, we see we grab all the ones that are a work in progress as the category. And it just happens to be one of them. All right, so we're going to need to do that for each category. So I'm going to actually just real quick, makes it real easy to not mess it up. Just paste those in, and I'm just going to change what I'm looking for to be the 3 different categories. So to do and done. And let's stop previewing that. And category, there's an extra $sign on those. All right, and now that we have that extra $sign removed, we just want to make sure we got all of them. So you can select it and see for yourself that the category done, it grabs it, and we just need to add a name to these now. So I'm going to call this category work in progress and category to do. And last but not least, category done. And let's hit that save button because we don't want to do that again. All right, let's head over to our home page once again. And now we're going to start adding in this user data. All right, so now that we have the Get Users Data API completed, head over to the widget, and we actually want to click on this tab bar right here. And we're going to go into the backend query, and we're going to do an API call, and we want to do the Get Users Data. So as the variable, we need to send in that auth token. So let's just grab it from the local state because we saved that. So confirm. All right, so now this is getting our users data, but this isn't actually displaying it. So we need to do that now. So go on to this column part right here. And we need to generate dynamic cards relating to that user based on the category. So I'm going to call this child to do, and I'm going to do it based on the get users data response. Going to go into the JSON path, and I want to grab the to do ones, the category to do. No further changes. And confirm. And so now it will now generate dynamic cards, and we should get something like that. So you're going to just do that for each of the categories. Make sure that it's the right corresponding category. All right, so I've just completed filling out each one, and you should end up with something like this. Do make sure you have a name for each one if it is giving you an error. So the next thing we want to do is actually display the data. This gets how many cards there will be, but it actually isn't displaying the data. So click on this image on the to-do one, and we want to set the path from a variable, and we want to go into the child to-do item. I want to go to the JSON path, and I'm going to do .image.url. So that's going to grab the image URL if there is one in Xano. And if there isn't one, let's go ahead and set up a conditional visibility. So this will handle if there is no image. So I'm going to go to the is set and say if the child to do item JSON path image.url is set, then display it. If it's not, then don't worry about it. Now the image is all done, let's go onto this text right here, and let's also set it from a variable. And we want to go into the child to do item, JSON path, and I want this to be the task name. So it's just going to be .task. And let's confirm that. And so now this will actually display any image and task relating to a card in the to-do section. All right, so the next thing I want to do is actually display all the data I want. So I want to display the task name, the image, if there is one, and I want to display the due date. And I also want to display if something is important or not. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. So within this row, I actually want to build out a new widget, and I want to do a column. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that task right there. I'm going to paste it inside of that column and delete the old one because I want the due date and task to kind of be stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to create another text, and right now it just says hello world. And all you have to do is go into that child to do item, and I'm going to say dot due underscore date. All right. And last but not least, I want to also display if an item is important. So within the row, I'm going to make an icon, and I want it to be like a gold star or something. So I'm going to go in here and we're going to say star. And now we have a star, and just changing the color. Yeah, like that orangey gold kind of works. That looks pretty good. And I also want to have the functionality of being able to delete a card. So I'm going to make another icon within this row, and it will handle deleting when I set that one up. So going into this icon, if I just type in delete, this one looks pretty good. So I'll use that and go into the icon color, and let's just make it red. And I think if you were to expand it, it kind of gives it a little bit more room. There we go, just a little more space. All right, so now that I have all of the things I want to display, let's actually go ahead and have this be a conditional visibility. And that's that gold star icon, because I only want it to be displaying if the important is set or not. So I'm going to do is set, and I'm going to do the child to do item. I'm going to grab that JSON path. I'm going to say dot important. So this says if important is set, then let's show it. If it's not, then don't worry about it. All right, now that this to-do container is completely correct, it's displaying everything I wanted to do. You can see, obviously, the work in progress and the done tab don't display this. So what you can do is you can copy this container and paste it onto these. But in doing that, you will have to set up all of these paths and the conditionals relating to each of these displaying icons or images or texts to be the correct category, because all of these are currently only looking at the category to do item. So if you're in work in progress, just set up the path to be the category work in progress, and in done, it should just be the category done. So if you copy and paste this over, you're going to get a bunch of errors, but it's okay. It's easily fixed. So I'm just going to hit replace, and you can see 5 errors popped up, and that's because of the conditional, the image path, the task name, the due date, and the icon. So once you've reset up the pathway exactly how I said it before, all the errors should be good. All right, so now that I have fixed all those errors, and hopefully you have as well, all you have to do is go into each one and just set the path to be the correct category, child item. Let's go ahead and add some functionality to this delete button. Go into our API, and I'm going to create a new API call, and it's going to be a type delete. Go to Xano, and let's find that. It's right here on this to-do ID. So let's copy the endpoint URL, paste that here, and I'm just going to call it delete. And one thing you need to know about this is FlutterFlow uses hard brackets instead of curly brackets to define their variables. So we need the ID of the card. So I'm going to go ahead and make a variable of that. And that's going to be called ID. And it's going to be a type int. And let's just add that call and head over back here. So let's go into the action of the delete icon. So let's give this an API call, and it will be the delete API. And let's just delete that conditional. And we need to give it the variable ID of the card is going to come from the child item, and it's going to be the JSON path.id. And the next thing we want to do is we just want to refresh the page to show that something has actually been deleted. So we're going to get the user's data again, and this will basically just show that something has been deleted. And we need that auth token. Again, it's from that local state that we saved it to. There we have it. Oh, and just delete that conditional. And now we have the delete API, delete functionality right here all finished. So the only thing we'll have to do is we'll just have to set up the functionality on each one of these cards. So if you go into the action tree, you'll just have to make that API call on each one of the categories, and it just grabs the different category item. So we're going to go ahead and I'll just do one more for you. And we're going to do an API call. Delete that. We're going to call delete, grab the card's ID, and you can see this is the only difference right here. It's going to grab a different child category item, and that should just be .id. And then just refresh the page and just do that for the last one. All right, so now that I have the delete functionality on each one of these categories working, each set for their category child item, let's go ahead and get started on being able to add a card. So let's go over to the API, and we're going to do a post. So post, and we want to head to Xano. We're going to do this post to do one right here. And we just want to grab the endpoint URL, grab that right here, and I'm going to call this create card. And this one's going to have a lot of variables. As we can see in here, we have all of these variables. Let's set that up right now. All right, so once you've added in all your variables, you should have something that looks like this. So I have all my variables set up. Now we want to actually let's add this just so we don't have to redo that just in case we navigate off the page. Let's go into the body, and we're gonna have to put each one of these in individually into this body. Unfortunately, you can't grab it from the Swagger UI, so I'll have to do that right now. All right, and now that I've set up the body, you should end up with something like this, where you basically have just initialize each one of these variables and set them in their corresponding place. So now that this is all finished, let's head over here, and we're actually going to want to click on this tab bar, and you can see it gives us this active tab, and we want to create a new tab. And once you have gone on to that, click on the tab, and let's just rename this add +sign. That'll be good for now. Let's also rename this text right here, and I'll call it new card form. All right, so now let's get started on making our new card form. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a text field. So it's going to be this form element down here called text field. And I'm going to add a column, and that should go right underneath it. And I want two of these actually, so I'm going to just Control D, duplicate it. And let's go ahead and name these. I want to name the first one task. So let's just go into here on this hint text. And instead of saying some hint text, I'll just call it task name. And on this second one, I'm going to call it category. The next thing I want to add is I want to come into this column, and I want a tile switch. So I'm going to grab this switch list tile, and I'm going to rename that to high priority. So this will handle if something is important or not. And I'm going to get rid of this secondary text. So we're just left with that right there. The next thing I'm going to want is I want a date picker. And the way you do that is you just add a button and we'll add the logic to it a little bit later. And underneath that button, I just want a text, not a text field, just text. And that will basically just display what date the user has picked. And last but not least, one more button that will handle actually creating the card. So it'll go right underneath it. And I'll just mess with this right here. So this will be, actually, let's go into this button first. And this will be our date picker. So we need to give it an action. So go into the action flow editor on that button right there. And if you look into date, you can see it right there, date time picker. So you can format this however you like. Oh. So I think I want them to be able to add date and time. So that'll be good right there. And so once this button is formatted to be our date picker, we can actually go onto this text and change what it displays to be the widget state of the date picked. And no further changes will be needed. So it'll now show us the date picked. So now that we have all the functionality in here, let's go ahead and get started on the Create Card API. So we're going to do an API call on the Action Flow Editor. And we're going to do Create Card. And we need to add all those variables from it. So there was task, and that's just going to come from the widget state of the task name. And the second one is going to be user ID. But wait a minute, we haven't actually gotten any way to get the user's ID yet. So what we need to do, we need to come back here and we need to create the get me auth API call. So I'm going to do create API call, head over to Xano, and let's go, I want to go to the starter template, and wherever you have basic auth me, grab that endpoint URL. Let's put that right here. And this is a get method, so we can go ahead and we're going to need that header. So authorization colon bearer and then hard brackets auth token. And in our variables, we just need to set up auth token, and that should be a type string, and we should be able to add that call. So in here, if I go over to Xano and run and debug this, grab my user's auth token, just fill that in right there, and then test this out, we can see we got a user's ID and all the information relating to them. And so if we go into this recommended, we can see that the JSON path ID is one of those, and we need that user ID. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to call it user ID and save that right there. So now we head back into our build, and you want to go all the way to the top of the widget tree and click on home. And we're going to need to do a couple things. So in our actions, we need to do that get me API call. So get user, and we need to put in the auth token, and that can come directly from the local state, and delete that. And then we want to store that user ID in a local state. So let's go back here and go into local state, and let's add integer type, and we'll call it user ID. And let's persist it, create, go back into this widget tree, go back into the action flow editor of that home one. And so this is the get users, and I want to add another action, and I want to update the local state of the user ID, and I'm going to set the value to come from the action output. I guess I should have renamed this. Let me rename this one right now. Get user ID. And it's going to come from there. It's going to be that very top one right there. Grab that JSON body, get the path, and we only want that user ID, and that's just so we can create cards. And now we'll always have that in our local state. So just to remind you, in the home, so that's on the page load. So whenever a user is navigated to our home, that will always happen. We'll always have that user ID ready. So now we just go back into our new card form button, and let's finish setting this up. So we're going to grab from a variable, and this user ID is going to come right from the local storage. And our next variable is our due date, and that should come from whatever the user fills out. in our widget state. So our due date is going to be the date picked, and there will be no further changes. And the next variable is whether it's important or not. And that'll come from the widget state of the switch tile value. Complete, we'll always set that to false because there's no point in creating a to-do list item that's already completed. The category will just come from the category text field. So in that widget, find category. And last but not least, we have our image. And we'll just want to set this to null because like I said earlier in the video, we are actually unable to upload images from Xano into FlutterFlow because they have to go through Firebase, but we're not Firebase, we're Xano. So we'll just forego the image creating. Last but not least, we'll want to just refresh the page and show that the user has created a new card with the getUsersData API call. So we're going to do getUserData. We're going to grab the auth token from our local storage. And now a user should see and it will update when a user updates their card. I was getting an error still and I couldn't figure out why. And it's because on this complete one, just make sure to click complete and then false. Just because it's set to false, I guess you have to actually set it yourself. So go ahead and click that. And now we have 0 errors right there. So we have now completed all the functionality for our to-do list. One thing to be aware of before I do actually start this is that you can see that there's these containers in here that have nothing in them, and it's actually just remnants of the template. So we just need to actually delete all of these containers that have only this row, image, and text. And as you can see, you can look at them, that they don't actually, it's not anything on this here project that we built. So we just want to delete only those containers that just have that row, image, and text. And there's quite a bit of them in each one. So you'll be deleting these for a little bit, but I'll meet you when you're all done deleting that. Hey everybody, Christian from the future here. Real quick fix that we need to do. Go ahead and click on this text date picked. This is displaying the date that gets picked by you on this date picker button. And I'm going to actually go ahead and rename this to date picker. And then I'm going to rename this one to submit. And then, so on this one, we need to set a conditional visibility on this date picker. So if there is no date that has been picked, it's not going to be displayed at all. This is very important. It will throw an error on your entire project if you do not set this conditional up. So I'm just going to walk you through it. So we're going to do a single condition. We're going to see if the widget of date picker is set, and we're going to have no further changes and confirm that. So we now should have a project that runs. I'm going to go ahead and hit this run button. You do as well, and I'll meet you when it's all loaded up. All right, so we're at the project, and I ended up actually just doing a test run instead of the actual run. The run one wasn't giving me a screen. It was just giving me a blank screen. But we got the project up here. And as you can see, everything gets displayed as we want it. I actually changed a couple things to not have an image, changed this to not have important, just to show you that those conditionals are working. And now we can go on to the new card. And now the next step in this tutorial is to edit the video. We're going to do that to do, and this is a high priority item, and we'll get started immediately. And there you have it. All right, everybody. Have a good night.